Thank you, Melina. So I will present to you now what happens, or what are the differences in second stage criteria, degree of innovation and scalability. So let me see. I've taken control now of the presentation and I hope everything is fine. So the first criterion I want to present to you is degree of innovation. You actually have already completed in first stage you have provided quite a lot of information on why your projects were innovative or are innovative. And actually, for those projects that continue to second stage, one thing is certain, they are all considered more than incrementally innovative. So all of the projects are considered innovative. So what changes now in second stage? Why are we looking at this criterion again? Of course, we look at all criteria in second stage, and in degree of innovation, we have slightly reorganized the application forms to allow you to present even more clearly how your project is innovative. So you will have first to explain again the state of the art, or there is a chance that you beef up this explanation, that you're very, very clear on what is the state of the art for your particular technology or set of technologies you are intending to demonstrate. Then, in the second section there, in the application form, you have to explain very clearly how your project goes beyond incremental innovation, substantially beyond incremental innovation. Actually, we expect and we know that all the projects that will have the chance to submit applications in second stage are somewhere between intermediate and breakthrough innovation. So we have suggested certain elements you can present, but of course it's up to you how you present the degree of innovation. So this is what you know already, and you had presented in any case here, that there is only a chance to just improve the presentation. The new element, however, is the contribution to other EU policy objectives. So in addition to what is like purely degree of innovation, we look at how the projects are contributing to other EU policy objectives, because the greenhouse gas emission calculation, for example, cannot take into consideration certain impacts, which do have actually an impact on greenhouse gases, but are not calculated by you. So, for example, energy efficiency is something that is very, very important, but cannot sufficiently be captured by the calculation of greenhouse gas emission avoidance. So there are three actually elements which we expect that the projects do the best possible. So in terms of energy efficiency, circularity, and use of electricity from renewable energy origin. What does this mean? So projects are expected to apply the best practices and to think of ways to even perform better in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of, for example, using raw materials or waste, or for the projects which are using electricity as an input, because the greenhouse gas emission avoidance calculation, we take their electricity carbon intensity as zero, we need to consider what type of electricity the projects will be using. And there is quite a number of projects using electricity as an input, electrification projects in industry or production of green hydrogen. It is very important that this electricity is indeed from renewable origin. So there are different ways that you can prove that. We're not very prescriptive. But I'm sure that applicants know what are the more secure ways to ensure that there would be additional renewable electricity installed on the grid to compensate for the electricity that will be used by our projects, the projects we will support. So for the first three elements, energy efficiency, circularity, and use of electricity from renewable energy origin, you are expected to do the best possible. So we are not going to give any extra points. On contrary, what can happen is that we can reduce points. On the other hand, there are two other elements, which are the net carbon removals and additional greenhouse gas emission savings, where you could possibly gain points. So let me explain one by one those two elements. So net carbon removals. When we talk about net carbon removals, we quite often think of, for example, combinations of bioenergy and carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and utilization, but in products which have a long life, like, for example, CCU for building materials. And, or, for example, also the combination of direct air capture, which again the same. Because of the greenhouse gas emission methodology, which is specific to the Innovation Fund, there could be other projects that have relative emission avoidance more than 100%. So it's not that all projects with relative emission avoidance with more than 100% are going to lead to true net carbon removal. So it is this specific element will be credited only for those projects which truly are going to lead to net carbon removals, and it's up to applicants, of course, to argue why they are going to deliver or likely to deliver net carbon removals. Then the last element, additional greenhouse gas emission savings, is something actually which was there right from the start. From the first stage, if you want, we have been quite clear that the methodology for greenhouse gas emission avoidance has to be applied, and there are certain boundaries that you're supposed to follow. There are certain emissions that you're not supposed to actually take into consideration, and then they can lead to additional greenhouse gas emission savings. So if we take, for an example, batteries facility for production of batteries, the calculation is done based on the use of these batteries in real life, for example, in vehicles later on. This is how you do the calculation of greenhouse gas emission savings. However, you may argue that your manufacturing facility for batteries actually is very innovative and can provide additional greenhouse gas emission savings. Normally, this is not part of the calculation, and this is the chance for such projects, for example, to do an additional or separate calculation of these greenhouse gas emission savings and to present it, and this can be credited under degree of innovation, i.e. here. So these two last elements, net carbon removals and additional greenhouse gas emission savings, they have to be substantiated with claims, with calculations integrated in separate tabs in the greenhouse gas emission Excel sheet. In fact, actually, if you do have claims which can be calculated under energy efficiency and circularity, we have also provided a specific tab where you can calculate and present those savings. In fact, all of those are under tab degree of innovation in the calculation tool, and Laura is going to explain a little bit more later on that. So I move to scalability because we really don't have much time and there's so much to say. So scalability is entirely new criterion now in second stage. Why, of course, you know why we are concerned with scalability. We want to support projects which have potential not only to reduce emissions on the project site, but actually have a potential to be replicated and contribute to our objectives for climate neutrality. So widely applicable technologies, we're interested in widely applicable technologies. And for scalability, there are three sub-criteria. The first one is the scalability at the project level and the regional economy impact. This sub-criterion is perhaps the easiest for projects because here you have the potential, you have the chance to explain how the project can expand first and foremost on the project side or on other sides of the company, for example. Then you know what is happening at the regional level. What would be the impact of your project on jobs, on economic added value created at the level of the region. And this is the chance to explain, this is the part where you can explain this. In addition, under this sub-criterion, we consider also the activities that the project is going to undertake for knowledge sharing. And I'm going to explain this on separate slides later on. Then the second sub-criterion is the sector impact. What do we mean by sector impact? We mean how is the technology likely, or the technology of the project likely to have an impact on the whole sector. So, for example, if you're working on a new technology in the steel sector, how is this technology going to be taken by all the companies in the steel sector? So this, of course, is a bit hard perhaps to imagine, but you still need to think of credible ways to demonstrate that your technology can be widespreadly applied in the sector, in your sector. Here's the chance actually to explain what are the expected cost reductions, because the penetration of technology, of course, will very much depend on the costs of this new technology. And if there are any resource constraints linked to your technology, you have to explain them and to explain how they can be overcome in the future. The third sub-criterion is to do with economy-wide scalability, extent to which the technology of the project can be applied across the economy. So here we're not talking anymore about the sector, but some technologies can be applied in other sectors economy-wide. And what we want to look here also is the potential to create new value chains or reinforce existing ones. So new projects and new technologies will have an impact on, for example, suppliers of the technology or of the raw materials. So how are you going, your project is going to have an impact on those new value chains or creation or reinforcing of existing ones. And then this also linked to that is the contribution to development of strategic autonomy in industrial supply chains. So for all of these sub-criteria, we ask you actually to think short and medium term, so mostly immediately as a result of the project, but also long-term impacts. And the scalability is actually what we want to know is really the long-term impacts. So we have actually provided in the greenhouse gas emission calculation tool also a tab which is called Scalability, and wherever it is possible to substantiate your claims with calculation, please do that in this calculation tool. This will help the evaluators and it will help your case. It will help you argue your case. So I'm moving now to the knowledge sharing, and just to remind you once again why we're insisting so much on knowledge sharing. Knowledge sharing is aimed to de-risk the innovative projects, the innovative low carbon technologies you will be demonstrating with regard to wide-scale commercialization. It is aimed to accelerate deployment, and it is aimed at increasing the undertaking and confidence of these technologies also by the wider public. That's why we're so much insisting on knowledge sharing, of course also on communication. But communication sometimes somehow comes easier to projects than knowledge sharing. And the last objective, of course, is the maintenance of competitive market for the post-demonstration deployment of technologies. Projects, the successful projects will be receiving very big and important public support, and it is important that important also part of the knowledge that they are gathering through this demonstration is shared. Of course, it is important that this information that is shared doesn't concern commercially sensitive elements, and we are going to ensure this throughout the process. So what are the knowledge sharing activities that will take place? There will be the beneficiaries, so you, the applicants, the current applicants, which will become in the future beneficiaries, will have the obligation to provide knowledge sharing reports after or before, actually after every payment milestone. So the knowledge sharing obligation is linked to payments. On the other hand, you have a chance also to write this knowledge sharing plan, which we are requesting in the application form. And this knowledge sharing plan is your own activities. What are you planning to do on your own in addition to the obligatory knowledge sharing reporting? For example, you can think of having a visitor center. You can think of organizing specific workshops for other companies which are interested in your technology. These are just examples. And you have to explain all this in the knowledge sharing plan that is a mandatory actually document and will be evaluated under scalability, as I said before. Of course, you are expected to do also proactive and systematic public communication. On the other hand, SINEIR, the executive agency, is going to take care of overall information, communication and promotion actions, but they're also going to organize workshops which regroup different beneficiaries, so different successful projects, and where they can exchange information at different levels. So there will be closed door events and open door events. The closed door events will be actually the events where you can share interesting outcomes of the projects between projects of the same type. We had, I just want to remind here that we had a workshop on the 26th of February, which all the information from this workshop on knowledge sharing is available on our website. And you can remind yourself of what we're planning to do with knowledge sharing through this workshop, the presentations and the recording. So, what I already kind of said, all that is knowledge sharing in practice, but just to repeat again, on the website, on the funding and tenders portal, if you follow this link, we will make these presentations available. If you follow the link, but of course going directly on the funding and tenders portal, you will find the draft knowledge sharing template. So this template is given only as an example of what beneficiaries are going to report on, depending on in which sector they are applying for. So we have given quite detailed examples for energy-intensive industries, for renewables, for hydrogen, for most sectors. You are not expected to complete this template at the moment, at the time of the application. The first time this will be completed by beneficiaries will be with the first request for payment, as I already said. But it is very important for you as an applicant to understand what will be expected from you in terms of knowledge sharing reporting. And this will allow you to create your own knowledge sharing plan, which builds on, so it is additional to the obligatory knowledge sharing reporting requirements, which you can see in the template. So I hope all that was clear. Oops, sorry. And we move to the next slide, if I can. And
yes, thank you very much, Maria, and thanks very much to everyone submitting questions on Slido, and also there were some questions on knowledge sharing received before. I think we clarified very well about the template, what is compulsory, what is not, what is submitted at each stage. Indeed, the dedicated event on knowledge sharing is also quite useful to watch, so please don't hesitate. And as always, if you have concrete questions, you can always use the Innovation Fund Help Desk. The questions from the relevant costs and cost efficiency section have disappeared from Slido, but do not worry, they are not lost. All the questions you have asked on Slido and all the comments are being saved and are not lost, and we try to look through them and to see whether they can inspire us for frequently asked questions to be published, or what is the general considerations of applicants. We cannot answer Slido questions in writing after the event. We try to do that during the event. If you need a written and detailed answer, again, the channel is the help desk. Just on scalability, Maria, if we can cover a little bit the questions. There is a question whether only Europe should be considered or also worldwide, for example, concerning experts. and how should the regional economy and the sectoral level be scoped in the scalability criterion? If we can answer on this before moving to greenhouse gases, I think it will be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Melina, and very good questions indeed. So first, it is up to the applicant to scope the regional economy, because the regional economy would be quite different depending on where exactly you are situated. So it is entirely up to the applicant to explain what is the region that the project will have an impact on. But basically, this is it. In fact, the impact related to the region depends on the project. Then the sector level, I believe I explained, is the specific sector you are applying in, and you have selected actually whether it's hydrogen or CCS or, for example, steel. This is the sector impacts we are looking for. Now, the question on EU or global impact is also very important, and to the extent that is possible, when you're talking about the sector level and economy level impact, if it is possible at all, I would the applicants should actually explain possible EU impacts and possible global impacts. This is not an obligation and not necessarily the case for all projects, but some of the sectors, by their nature, are quite global sectors. And it is expected, I mean, a lot of our applicants are actually global companies. So we're expecting that the good technologies that they are developing will be replicated also globally. So it is here a chance for you to argue if this is the case, and of course it will be our evaluators which will deem whether this is credible or not. So I think I explained enough on the knowledge sharing plan and template.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Maria. Also, being mindful of time, I suggest that we pass the floor to Laura Pereira for the presentation on the greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? So good morning, I'm Laura Pereira, and I'll be briefing you on what changes in the second stage to the methodologies that feed into the 2JG emissions avoidance criterion. And also we will introduce you to the additions to the documentation that have been made available for you at this point. At the end, me and my colleagues Rocio and Mikhail from the GRC and also Jakob from Fraunhofer will be available to respond to any questions you have that haven't been addressed already by the presentation. So, yes, thank you. I will skip the detailed recap of the methodologies, but the overall concepts remain the same. I mean, for all projects, absolute emissions avoidance will be equal to the emissions that would occur in the absence of the project, which we called reference scenario, minus the emissions that occur due to the project activity, which we call project emissions. And then the relative emissions avoidance represent somehow how much of the reduction potential that you leverage has been leveraged by the project, and is calculated dividing the absolute emissions avoidance by the reference emissions of their principal product. And we'll talk about that a bit later. Next slide, please. So the difference is that in the second stage, some of the project emissions that could be disregarded in the first stage will have to be included in the calculations. So here you have the equations to the different sectors that you have applied in the first stage. And I assume that you are now very familiar with those. So I won't go through each of these parameters, detailing what's within that. Instead, I will focus on what changed in the second stage. So if you could change slide. The changes that must be added in this new submission are highlighted in red, yes, in this slide. So for energy-intensive industries, some inputs that had been disregarded in the first stage will now have to be included if the emissions attributed to them exceed 5% of total emissions related to the project, whereas before the filter was 10%. So now we have a larger number of emission sources that you need to account for. For CCS, there are no changes to methodology. However, I would suggest that you revisit your applications and to ensure that data remains applicable and that your assumptions are sufficiently robust. I remind you, and everyone remind you throughout the presentation, that this is still a very competitive round, and you want to make sure your project doesn't get rejected because you calculated something incorrect or because you haven't backed with robust evidence. So please do revisit all your assumptions. Then for energy, a renewable energy production project, emissions that shall now be part of the calculations are on-site emissions for all projects and leakage emissions just for geothermal plants. And the calculations are quite simple. You have amount of fuel and then apply emission factors that have been made available, are provided to all cases. The challenge here is how to forecast the amount of fuel that your project will consume in both stationary and mobile sources, because these are not projects that are running, so everything will need to be forecasted. So make sure you spell out your assumptions and provide reference on how these have been estimated and defined. And the same apply to energy storage projects, which will now have to deduct emission from vehicles and stationary machinery as well. So next slide, please. Here on the Annex C, we have also done some improvements to the text to provide more clarity in points where we received more questions, which made us realize that perhaps they weren't so clear. The text wasn't much clear on this point. This was particularly important to projects involving manufacturing of components that will be used in energy storage and renewable facilities. I'm not going through all of them, as this slide will be made available for you, as well as the iteration of Annex C. The only point I would like to emphasize is the update of the ETS benchmarks reference. If you have used ETS benchmark as your reference, most likely energy-intensive industries, please make sure you update accordingly. Next slide. Well, a piece of good news is that we are now providing a template for energy-intensive projects to estimate these emissions, which were available only for other sectors in the first stage. And we have also added new tabs to make your submission more robust. We thought these would be helpful based on common mistake observed across the application, as well as the best practice observed. So I'll briefly go through these, but it's worth to spend some time getting familiar with these new tabs, with the tools which are already available at the Funding and Tenders portal. Next slide. So this is just a screenshot of the energy-intensive industry tool. We really encourage all applicants to adopt this new template in the second stage, rather than just updating, refreshing, and resubmitting the Excel that was submitted in the first stage. And you will see that the efforts to transfer these figures to the new template are minor in comparison to the benefits of using it. And will certainly help you make your entire submission more traceable and more accurate. These two also embed ETS benchmarks and the emission factors that you have to use in the reference scenario. For instance, if you produce fuel, so examples of fossil fuel comparators, emission factors, these are all embedded in the tool. Next slide. So this tab is the summary tab. Yes, this one. So for those already using the tool provided, you may recall that we had a tab summarizing the calculations to inform the two GHG emission avoidance criterion, the absolute and relative emissions avoidance. Even with that, we've observed some inconsistencies between the figures that were in the tool and those that were in the form. So we've tried to make it a bit more straightforward and have also added to the list what indicators that shall now be provided in the new Form C, and also for knowledge sharing purposes that Maria already briefed you. But other than that, no major changes to this tab. Next slide. So the tabs for calculation of reference and project emissions remain roughly the same. What we try to improve is the part related to data traceability. We have added extra columns that you can use to describe how data is gathered, how it's internally checked, who validates, and where is stored. This will help applicants, yourselves, ensure the memory of the calculation isn't lost with changes in personnel. And we know that this happens often. So, and these data translability columns will also serve as a starting point for your monitoring plan. And of course, if you think you need more room to describe that, but here we try to make sure that this is all sourced in the same Excel sheet. But if you need more room, please feel free to add an extra tab and add appendixes to it. So you can, it's just a starting point, you can build on that. And next slide. Yeah, on the assumptions, this is a new tab. I know we have emphasized since the beginning the importance of documenting and referencing all the assumptions adopted, but we still have received several applications with those already embedded in the calculations or scattered across the Excels. Some were informed just in the form B, so evaluator would have to try pick and match, or would spend much more time trying to figure out where data came from or refers to. So to ensure a more efficient evaluation, we have created a separate tab that you shall use to document quantitative and qualitative assumptions used to project consumption, production, or whatever you, whichever primary data, secondary data you're using. Next slide. So I've been mentioning common mistakes that we spotted and the best practice that we observed and how this has helped us build these new additions to the tool. But then we thought that it would be useful to share with you all of those, so that to enable you to self-check whether you are following these best practices and, as a result, making your application more robust. I reiterate, this is still a very competitive round, so you don't want to reduce your chances because of silly mistakes or not so silly mistakes. So using the best practice to compare your project will be a good way to sense check that. And next slide. So here is the full list. It's a bit squeezed, but you will receive this through the tools and also in the slide deck. And the best practice they are presented in the format of a question, so you can compare, like, have you done this, this, and that? Yes, I did. So that you can tick the boxes to compare against what you did in your application. One common mistake that we hope this checklist will help avoiding is the miscalculation of reference emissions for energy-intensive industries projects. Emissions from non-principal products produced in the project scenario should be treated only in the project scenario, and no changes is required in the reference scenario. So if one add those emissions to the reference emissions, we'll have a problem when calculating absolute and relative emissions avoidance, because these reference emissions are distorted and are using the denominator of the relative emissions. And this could lead, for instance, to projects exceeding 100% of relative emissions avoidance, which we observed in some cases and weren't necessarily correct. So this is one of the things that we hope you can spot whether you're doing the correct way or not. Again, I won't go through this as we don't have much time. We prefer to leave more room to the questions and to the other presentations, but feel free to get back to us if you have any questions on that. Then the next slide. So another useful addition to the tools are the examples. So in stage one, we present a series of hypothetical calculations during the webinars that we took to illustrate how each sector would have to estimate emissions avoidance or critical the bottlenecks of each one. So for the second stage, we thought it would be more useful to place these examples directly in the tool to illustrate the calculations, to illustrate how the tool shall be used, and also because you can then consult in your own time, because during the webinars, you are not necessarily ready to understand what your questions will be when you start to calculate. So hopefully this will provide more clarity for you. But of course, the help desk will still be available for if you face any challenges when estimating your emissions. We have prepared 3 examples for energy-intensive industries, which are green hydrogen, e-fuels, and methanol. For CCS, we've chosen a direct air capture project. For renewables, we have a production facility project. And for energy storage, the example considering storing hydrogen into a liquid organic hydrogen carrier. Next slide, please. So Maria have talked about these 2 criteria, and that we thought would be a good idea to merge this to the tool. So because these 2 criteria, they also comprise some aspects related to GHG emissions or energy efficiency, materials, circular economy, as Maria discussed. So we thought you would benefit to have them documented in the same place, so that you can eventually link data when calculating if the data that you will use in additional savings is already mentioned for the GHG emissions avoidance. Perhaps you can benefit from an emission factors as well. So we want to make sure these are all in the same place. So with that in mind, we've created 2 tabs, and will be particularly useful for those projects with GHG savings that goes beyond the boundaries defined in the Innovation Fund methodologies. So as Maria already mentioned, we have received several applications where these extra savings have been added to the absolute emissions, even though we spell out what was the scope that should be in, and this is incorrect. So we want to avoid the same to occur in stage 2, but otherwise the project may be rejected just for a misunderstanding. So, but please note that these tabs cover only part of what you must submit under the degree of innovation and scalability criteria. These are there are other aspects of this criteria that you will have to address separately that are not necessarily quantitative or not necessarily related to the GHG. So, and you can also expand on to the tool to serve your specific case. They are not, if you think that that's missing something, please feel free to expand on that. Yes, thank you. So my final slide is on the third-party verification, which triggered a number of help desk questions. I just want to clarify that a third-party verification goes beyond the review of the conversion from operational data to tons of CO2. An accredited verifier should also secure that the project boundaries that are adequate and in line with the Innovation Fund methodology. They should assess the accuracy and completeness of the data used to develop the emissions results in each year's projections. They should check how robust and reliable are your assumptions and the conversion factors that have been applied if they were not provided in the tool. And of course, an accredited verifier would also review your monitoring, your QA/QC planning, and check whether the results reported accurately reflect those calculated. Surprisingly, that was not the case for all the applications. And of course, the SINEA evaluators do review the quality of the assumptions, but they don't drill down the assumptions to the source. I mean, up to the invoices or SAP reports, we have not reviewed this during the evaluations. So the third-party verification is the way we found to ensure that you are competing against projects that have used realistic assumptions, and that these assumptions are backed with robust evidence. Because you can inflate your absolute emissions avoidance and benefit from that, but if you don't back, how do a project may lose points to one that haven't been backed. So we don't want this to happen. And of course, we appreciate it entails a cost that some applicants might not be willing to spend without being sure that they will be selected. But such verification, it it shouldn't take more than 2 days to be completed, and it doesn't require site visits. It could be done entirely remotely through desktop reviews and phone interviews. So if you need to estimate how much effort, the level of effort involved, it shouldn't be the similar of a greenhouse gas inventory audit. This is much more oriented to a project. Well, and with that, I finish my slides, and we'll be here available to your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura and Maria, for the detailed presentation. I think this is one more presentation that needs to be watched, pressing the pause button, looking into documents and carefully reviewing things. But as our viewers can see, we have put a lot of effort in trying to simplify and consolidate and link the different elements of the application concerning greenhouse gas emissions, to provide more examples, to streamline the templates. So we hope this is really, really helpful for applicants. I would like to thank everyone for the many questions asked on Slido. The one that has attracted most likes is concerning the requirements for the verification, but I think Laura explained this in quite some detail, so maybe we don't dwell on it. There was also a question whether we consider a webinar on greenhouse gas emissions specifically. Of course, we are happy to see what questions will be submitted to the help desk, and whether from these questions a more generic webinar can be derived so we can answer meaningfully. But so far, our assessment is that it is possibly better for applicants to submit their questions in detail to the help desk so they can be analyzed and answered. So for the time being, we're not planning a webinar on greenhouse gas emissions. Maria, Laura, maybe there are a few questions that we could answer before moving to the next session. So there is a question on greenhouse gas monitoring and whether the monitoring period can be extended from the 10 years, and by how much. So Maria or Laura, would you like to address this?
Yes, I can address this. In fact, not. So we have fixed the monitoring period for 10 years. I mean, we don't, of course, projects can continue, and we actually expect that projects will have a longer lifetime, but 10 years is considered sufficient for any technology to be stable. Even after the first 3-4 years, this would be the expectation. So you can, in more exceptional circumstances, request a short period, but not a longer period.
Thank you very much. And there is another question which is about guaranteed access to geological storage. Is it needed, so it should be added to the calculations, or not?
Well, you don't need to have the access ensured right from the beginning, but at some point at financial close, we would expect that this is guaranteed. Of course, you would be able to add it in the calculation. In fact, we have an expectation that all projects that are concerned with CO2 capture will have a credible case for utilization or storage of all of the CO2 that will be captured. And this will, of course, be considered also under project maturity.
Thank you very much. One other question is about the power purchase agreement for renewable energy or alternative contracts for renewable energy supply. Are they mandatory to be submitted at financial close?
Well, it all depends on what the project is intending to do. Indeed, if the project is intending to have a power purchase agreement, and of course it will depend at which point of time this electricity, well, the power purchase agreement will kick in. So at financial close, it may already be possible to actually demonstrate that the contract is signed. It could be that in some projects this is foreseen for later on. So it all depends on the strategy of the project.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Maria. Maybe one last question, which also attracted quite some comments. Let me see if I can find it. No, sorry. I think we have answered it. So, being mindful, or Maria, would you have any more comments you would like to make?
Well, I just wanted to say that we see indeed a lot of interesting questions, but which shows actually that some of those questions may be coming not from applicants which have already applied, but future applicants, and this is really positive. But I think most of the answers actually you will find by reading the methodology. And if you are indeed an applicant, we invited to second stage and cannot find the answer, please submit the question in the help desk and we will make our best to answer it.